more interesting things about the Masters of the Universe Classics line was we had a bit of a Hordak problem. That being that every time we released a different Hordak figure, there seemed to always be a controversy around it. Like, it wasn't right. And, some of the things I can understand. When we did the Spirit of Hordak, or also known as the Red Popsicle Hordak, fans were a little off-put because, well, they'd never heard of this character before, even though we seeded the idea in the mini-comics that he might be coming. That was, to drum up interest. But he was also done as a chase figure, kind of like at retail when there's a hard-to-find variant. This was actually something management specifically requested that we do. They wanted us to emulate the retail chase online, and that's what we did. So, yeah, while that Hordak had his controversies, it wasn't the only one. Even the original release that we did of Hordak back in 2009, right, one of the very first original 6 figures, he had issues too, and that was because, well, we were doing figures that were updated versions of the original figures from the 80s. That was always the plan. And the thing was, back when Masters of the Universe Classic launched, it was very, very soon after the 2000X line had more or less died away. And there were a lot of adult collectors very, very invested in this line. It did a lot better with collectors than it did with kids. And Hordak and the Horde made an appearance in episode 35, which was going to lead into them coming into season 3. While we didn't get a Hordak action figure in the 2000X line, we did get a really cool Staction figure from NECA that the Horseman did. Sort of what he would have looked like had he been an action figure, but this without the articulation. And this left fans wanting more. In fact, they really wanted more Horde since we'd been teased that they were going to be coming in a much larger area of the show. So when we put out the very first Hordak and it wasn't a 2000X version, fans were like, whoa, okay, well this is great, we got our classic one, but when do we get our 2000X? And the same thing happened when we did the San Diego Comic-Con Filmation version of Hordak. A lot of fans were like, okay, well this is great, but this is not a Filmation Hordak. Well, yeah, that was actually the point. You see, let me back up a little bit. So the original Hordak that came out in the 80s had gray skin, all the different variants of him, whether he had an action feature in his chest or his arm. When Hordak was used for the She-Ra animated series, they changed him from being gray to being blue. This was done completely for aesthetic reasons, because basically blue popped more on screen, and he was easier to see against a dark background, like all of the Fright Zone was very dark, and you could spot a character with blue skin a lot easier than one with gray skin. So when we came out with a blue-skinned Hordak that was more or less a repaint of the gray-skinned Hordak, a lot of fans were going, oh, you guys cheaped out, or you're just, reissuing a figure. Why don't you do the animated style head? This is not what we want, especially because, again, the head was exactly the same head, just with a different deco. But see, that was actually exactly the point. We knew that fans wanted an animated version of Hordak. This was not supposed to be that. We were always planning on doing animated versions of the figures. The A-list characters always sold the best, and finding ways to get them out there again for fans was always part of the long-term plan. And eventually, yes, a true animated articulated 6-inch action figure of Hordak was done as part of the Club Grayskull line, although that was with Super 7. Real shocker, my job and everyone's job at Mattel was to make money for the company, to sell a lot of toys, not just give collectors everything they wanted all at once. So just like when Super 7 did their sort of retro version of Hordak, this was not done with an animated style head. It was just the existing Hordak head repainted. And fans had been looking for years at what a Filmation Hordak could possibly look like when translated into the classics aesthetic. All the way down to his cannon arm, to the way the bone structure on his armor was a little different from the way the original action figure was. So in the classics figure that we released at Comic-Con, we gave him all the bells and whistles. We gave him alternate hands, alternate arms. We even packed in his little sidekick, Imp. This wasn't supposed to be an animated style Hordak. This was just supposed to be Hordak in the sort of, well, I guess, Filmation colors, but in classic style. So we did get to do Imp, and yeah, I guess he does look a little cartoony. It's kind of hard to do him and not make him cartoony, sort of like Orko. It's just in the nature of how he's designed. But we wanted the figure to feel like it was part of classics and not part of an animated subline, because we knew that line was coming down the road as a way to keep interest in releasing more Masters of the Universe figures. So it was a way of getting fans a blue-skin Hordak, but not getting them an animated one. We were also able to use the bios for each successive Hordak to continue to tell his story. So one of the great things about having multiple versions of main characters is the bios could then expand on that storyline, and this was exactly what we did with the San Diego Comic-Con, Etheria Hordak. It also explained why he had blue skin. This was shown in the mini-comic when King Grayskull cuts off his arm. You can see he has blue blood. It's also why he has a cannon arm. And it was explained in the bio that the blood rose to his surface on Etheria because of the magical properties, and that was why he appeared to have blue skin on that planet. So, hey, explained! So yes, not an animated style Hordak, never intended to be an animated style Hordak, always meant to be a classics version of Hordak, just with the blue skin and the cannon arm, and again, we threw in Imp, and as a special bonus for San Diego Comic-Con, you didn't just get Imp, but if you bought the figure at the show, polybagged as a gift with purchase, you got Imp as a treasure chest. This was something we'd been doing for a few years that management really encouraged, and while I know some fans didn't love the idea of a bonus item at Comic-Con, started back when we did Gleek with the DCU Classics figure. You could buy the Wonder Twins online, but only at the show could you get Gleek polybagged. And I totally understand fans feeling that, well, they should have been able to get Gleek everywhere, but the idea was this was meant not to make every fan happy. It was meant to generate publicity, which it did. Again, much like that barrel of money slide a few minutes ago, the job of a marketing manager at Mattel is to create publicity and sell toys. So while everybody could get Hordak with his arm and his staff and the Imp sidekick, only at San Diego Comic-Con could you get the little treasure chest. It was meant as a bonus for those who went out of their way, went to Comic-Con, and yes, I know not everyone had the means to get there, and I understand that. But if you didn't spend, the thousands of dollars on a plane ticket, and San Diego Comic-Con badges, you could easily pick up the treasure chest online for less than that. Now, it's interesting to note that the treasure chest was actually sculpted to be part of Shadow Weaver. It was designed to be one of her accessories, but it turned out we couldn't afford it at the time. And we'd been sitting on the sculpt of Imp as the treasure chest for years. And when we finally got to the blue skin Hordak, it was like, oh, great, we can use this as our bonus item for San Diego Comic-Con, as man required us to do. It's also interesting to note that the prototype, the sculpt that was designed for Shadow Weaver, wasn't designed to open, but for the actual tooled version, Bill wanted it to open. So a little, a hinge was added, and that did sort of interrupt the back part of the sculpt, but it allowed for you to, store small things inside. So, I don't know, maybe one day they'll do a version without the hinge and fully closed, but it was kind of cool to see the difference. So, yes, to get the complete Hordak, you had to go to San Diego Comic-Con, get Imp in his polybag, and if you weren't at Comic-Con, you could definitely pick one up on the secondary market for way less than it cost to go to the show. And that's kind of how it aired out. Of course, years later, when Super 7 took over the license, they just took the treasure chest and threw it in with their Filmation animated-style Hordak, which to me was kind of like a kick in the pants, because for the people who went to Comic-Con, this was meant to be a bonus for them. But, oh well, they wanted to max out the accessories. What can I say? I always thought things that are designed and promoted as only at Comic-Con should remain that way. It's sort of a promise made to fans, and I feel like that integrity is important. So while Hordak has changed over the years, he is definitely recognizable from very specific design elements, from his face to his the bat symbol on his chest. And no matter how he comes, whatever skin color he has, he's definitely a very recognizable villain, and we're lucky to have him in the lineup because of this. Sometimes when villains have variants, they're almost made unrecognizable, but this blue version, while not in animated style, in classic style, gave you a unique version to have on your shelf, and it worked for classics. Club Grayskull wasn't that far off, and the animated version would get released in that line, again, with the goal to sell as many toys as possible. And yes, I know we never got to a 2000X version, and it's unfortunate that 2000X had to end the way it did, but hey, maybe one day we'll get a collector series based on this show. Anything could happen. It's a giant Masters of the Universe multiverse out there. I'm just glad we got to a blue version.